Well, let's talk about all of this with Zia Yusuf. He's chairman of Reform UK and joins us once again. A very good afternoon, Zia.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us. Well, I suppose just initially your reaction when you saw that poll at 10 o'clock last night showing Labour on 25 percentage points. If, 25% of people say they would vote Labour if there was a general election tomorrow. Reform on 24, just 1 point behind. Tories languishing in third place at 22 points. Lib Dems back in at 14% and Greens at 8%. What was your reaction when you heard that news?
My reaction was the same as millions of people across the country, which was obviously delighted. People in this country can now see for the first time in around a century the stranglehold that the two old parties have had on British politics is finally breaking in real time. We're seeing history being made. I will say about this YouGov poll, it's not an outlier. I mean, Reform has been making new highs with pretty much every polling company. They all have slightly different methodology. Obviously, YouGov have a very strong reputation, and it is the first voting intention poll they have done since the general election. I will just respond to your guest's comments a moment ago. If you just look at the numbers, these are just objective facts. If Reform is sitting on 24 to 25%, and 31% is what a party needs under the first past the post system in order to have a majority and to form a government, then all we actually really need to do from here is win 3 percentage points from Labour and the Conservatives. Nobody needs, it's simply not true that one of those parties has to go down to 10%. And if you look at the progress Reform has made since the general election, in those 7 months, almost all of the poll gains have actually come from Labour, not from the Conservatives. It's my view, based on what I'm seeing, and we do a lot of our own private polling, and obviously we speak to thousands of people at the doorstep all the time at Reform. We're winning support from Labour, we're winning support from the Tories, we're winning support from people who've never voted before, never engaged before. We did a training event. We've launched a centre of excellence for our council candidates, and over half of the room, we had about 150 people there, had never engaged meaningfully in the political system before. So there's something really powerful happening in Britain, and I think it's brilliant.
Well, I mean, there's the thing. I mean, there is an argument about whether one of those parties has to go down, one has to go up. But the reality is there is a concern about the fact that the rights vote is split in a way that the left vote isn't, and it's how those votes are distributed as well, isn't it? Because it completely depends whether lots of votes are being piled up in one particular seat or spread around. The Lib Dems for years, they were doing perfectly well in the polls, but their votes were kind of spread sort of evenly around the country, well, fairly evenly, and they never quite made it. And then they got to the point where they were doing very well in some London seats, outer the home counties, and particularly in the southwest, and then they started building on that. Reform doing very well in particular areas, a lot of coastal towns, a lot of the Midlands and the north, and in Essex doing well. But it's where those seats are those votes are being piled up. And one of the issues you've got is you're second in roughly 100 seats around the country. I think 89 of those, am I right in thinking, are Labour seats. But you're a long way behind in a lot of those seats by 20 percentage points or more. So Labour could fall 10 points and you could go, but you could still not win those seats. There's a very big difference between doing well in an opinion poll and actually translating that into bums on those green benches in the House of Commons. And you know that. That's part of your job as chairman of the party, to try and orchestrate that.
Correct. I do know that because it's what I spend most of my woken hours working on and thinking about with Nigel. And that's actually what makes me even more bullish, actually, than most people, because I can see the majority of what we've been working on at Reform in terms of building our ground campaign capabilities can't yet be seen. You're going to start to see that firstly in May, depending on how many elections happen. Obviously, the Tories and Labour have colluded appallingly to rob millions of British people, English people in particular, from their democratic right to boot out these awful councillors. But let me also say one other thing, Julia, those points, when people say, oh, you're second behind Labour in 90 seats, that's based on data that is 7 months old. In that general election, we won 14.1% of the vote. In the YouGov poll yesterday, we're winning between 24 and 25%. So that is out of date. Yeah. And when you look at the MRP polls, which MRP, for those who don't know, are the most sophisticated way to be able to work out how many seats would be won by a party. Those are consistently now showing us winning somewhere between 120 and 140 seats. In the coming weeks, you will see us consistently demonstrating we would win more seats in the House of Commons than the Conservative Party if a general election were to be held today. And by the way, sadly, we are still years away from a general election. As much as I would love for there to be another general election, how many of the leaders did the Tories get through? They got through about one a year and never called a general. If Starmer is deposed, it'll be someone like Angela Rayner or Lammy who ends up getting in. So,
seriously,
well, exactly,
people keep saying things. When I say things can't get much worse, oh my God, they really, really could.
But sometimes things do need to get worse before they can get better, Julia. And what I will say is that is what Reform are offering. You know, this is not a protest vote. Anyone who comes to our events will tell you they are the most optimistic and positive and poignant events that you could ever go to. And that's what's sweeping the country, a sense of hope that we're going to finally have patriotic, courageous and competent leadership that puts the British people first. That's what Nigel will do as Prime Minister.
OK, well what is the big, big draw for people moving to Reform? Because a lot of people we know have come from, not just from the Conservative Party, from Labour as well, or people who haven't voted for a while. But those coming from the Conservative Party, and we saw the Conservative vote basically halved to all intents and purposes at the last general election compared to 2019. That's after, of course, the predecessor of the Reform Party, the Brexit Party, basically stood down a load of candidates to enable Boris Johnson to, quote, get Brexit done. But what we saw is about half those voters who left the Tories either didn't vote at all, or they voted for Reform. You say your 4 million plus votes, but what are they being drawn to? Is it about being, staunch on things like, culture issues, on anti-woke? Is it about net zero? Is it about immigration? What is it about the economy? What are the policies that people are coming to you for? What is the appeal?
I think it's a combination of things, first amongst which is that Reform offers a truly different way of doing politics. This isn't a party full of career politicians. When Nigel's the Prime Minister, you won't have a cabinet full of people who have gotten to that role because they've carried his bag around for 20 years, which does appear to be the primary qualification, maybe with a slice of corruption in there as well that you need to be in a cabinet at Labour or the Tory party. But look, people are obviously extremely concerned about the porous nature of our borders. 37,000 undocumented people came across the English Channel last year. Those numbers are not declining in any meaningful way.
We've had 100 plus come
net
yesterday.
Migration was 1 million. Sorry?
We've had more than 100 come yesterday.
Indeed. It's absolutely shocking for a country that spends £54 billion a year and still has a formidable navy. So it's beyond the pale, and British people understand that. Now, when you look at net migration, that number was 1 million last year. The Tories in 4 consecutive manifestos claimed that was going to be tens of thousands. This is something that I don't think a lot of Tory analysts and commentators and people who have been around for a long time appreciate. They still think this is a sort of two-party system. They talk about how long Thatcher took. And look, the reality is you can't lie to the British people so many times, betray them that many times and expect them to forget. The Tory party seems to have pinned their hopes of recovery on this notion that the British people are going to suffer from chronic and sustained catastrophic memory loss. That is not going to happen. Okay. And what Reform are offering is an alternative. We're going to cut people's energy bills massively because we're going to end this ridiculous religious cult of net zero, which one should not forget was instituted and legislated and enshrined by the Conservative Party, Which is why they can never really attack it meaningfully. Now, Mad Ed Miliband is adding rocket fuel to this disaster. We have the most expensive electricity in the world. Yesterday you had Keir Starmer announcing the UK was going to be an AI superpower when the UK has the most expensive electricity in the world. Anyone who knows anything about AI would have been laughing incredibly hard at that assessment. So the Tory
we were talking about it on the show, pointing out, if our energy costs for businesses are 5 times what they are in America, which is what they are, nobody's going to set up an AI business here when they can set it up in America. End of. Absolute waste of time. I have a funny feeling Keir Starmer doesn't know anything about AI, and that's why he's pursuing this mad policy. But here's the thing. We've seen this move, we've seen Trump in America, we've seen, some various South American elections, in Argentina as well. We're also seeing what's been happening in parliamentary elections in Germany, in Italy, in France and elsewhere. There is this move towards, right-wing parties. Well, they're often called far-right, fascist, but certainly on the hard right, I would say, parties, particularly strong on immigration, net zero, certainly an issue. And yet Britain saw this swing against the Tories, probably for being too left-wing, where we ended up with Labour. Do you think that we are going to be sort of trailing a lot of those other countries in terms of our move inevitably back to the right? And what is the risk, as many are pointing out, in terms of the next general election? Reform are doing well, Tories are doing relatively badly, but you've still got that solid sort of, vote for the Tories from people who voted lifelong. And Labour end up walking in again with another big majority. What would you say to that?
Well, that's simply not going to happen. I mean, firstly, the idea that the British electorate went left, that's just not supported by the facts and the data. It's a function of the esoteric nature of our first-past-the-post system. Keir Starmer won fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn. Both times Jeremy Corbyn ran to be Prime Minister. The reason Labour won such a big majority is because the Tory vote absolutely collapsed. 2.6 million Tory voters from 2019 stayed at home last year because they felt utterly betrayed. Many of those are now coming over to Reform as well, by the way, because they see a party that is actually going to deliver on the things that the Tories claimed that they would. And, you know, one thing I'd say as well is 7 months ago when Reform won 14% of the vote, we heard from many critics, including sort of many Tory commentators, you know, the Reform Nigel Farage vote sort of capped at 14-15%. Then it was going to be capped at 20%. We burst through 20%. Now it's sort of capped at 25%. And every time we were implored to do a pact or a deal with the Tories, it's not going to happen because you simply cannot do a pact. You cannot ever trust somebody, I'm afraid, who has betrayed the British people so many times.
Well, again, I'm just going to go back to what point I was making a bit earlier about, you know, you could still be riding high in the polls and not actually get the actual number of seats you want. Looking back at 1983, the SDP and Liberals in a less DP Liberal alliance, they won 25% of the vote. That's exactly where you are on the polls right now. But they ended up with only 23 seats. Unless you get above a certain point, it is. I know their vote may be distributed in a different way, but you need to get. You need to be hitting 30%. Yeah, you're on the trajectory for that, no doubt. But you need to be hitting 30% to actually turn it into a serious number of seats.
Well, I'd also add to that, one shouldn't forget, you know, the day of the general election, Reform UK had 0 branches across the country. We now have well over 400 branches across the country. Around the general election time, we had around 50,000 members and people who want to be activists. We are closing in on 200,000. And I will tell you, these people are so, my inbox is slammed and inundated with people wanting to go knock on doors and deliver leaflets. So everything you're talking about is actually why Nigel asked me to become chairman. It's what we've actually spent most of our time, and I include Nigel in that, over the last 7 months, and that's not going to change. We're building a really high-quality ground campaign.
Can I ask, though, we had a caller earlier actually criticising Charlie Mullins, who was on Mike Graham's show, the Pimlico Plumbers chief, who we're talking about, living in Spain now, effectively, most of the time because of the high taxes here. But he's talked about how he wants to be a Reform UK candidate the next election, and we know Nigel Farage is keen on that. And one of our callers said, actually, I would not vote for the party on that alone. As someone who was, Charlie Mullins, staunch pro-lockdown, vaccine mandates. He didn't want people allowed out of their houses if they hadn't had a vaccine. Massive, not just a Remainer, massive Ramona. Why on earth would Nigel Farage, your party leader, want Charlie Mullins to be a candidate for your party, which it seems to me that Charlie Mullins stands for virtually everything the Reform Party stands against?
Listen, I don't know Charlie or very much about him, so I can't really comment.
Maybe someone should check before you allow him to be a candidate.
Well, hold on. We haven't got any candidates announced for the next general election. And look, the vast majority, we're going to go from 5 MPs to north of 325 MPs. That has never been done before. And the vast majority of those people will actually be new to politics. They'll generally be people who've done proper jobs in the outside world. Not that there's anything wrong with career politicians per se, but one reason we are in the lanes that we are.
You were not working in the complaints department at HBOS, no?
Correct. Although apparently now they're going to use AI inside her department, and obviously in most complaints departments, that is what they've now become. They just basically use AI to give you these automated responses, and no doubt Miss Reeves will be receiving many, many complaints.
Zia Yusuf, always so good to be joined by you, Chairman of Reform UK. Thank you very much indeed. Sam Armstrong is putting up a very robust fight there. Now, look, you're a Conservative, he's Reform. You'd love to have him batting for your party, wouldn't you? Well,
look, I think the more important thing is I suspect there is a cigarette paper between the sorts of policies I would like to see and the sorts of policies...
And the stuff that Robert Jenrick, you were working on his candidate campaign for Tory leadership, the sort of stuff he was pushing.
I don't think there's much between it. And look, I think there are problems with the Conservative Party. I think there are problems with the Reform Party. I think there are huge problems, though, with the way that our electoral system works. And you set out what happened to the SDP. The fact of the matter is, the Reform Conservative vote share will, at best case scenario, be similar to what it is now at the time of the next election. And if Keir Starmer can hold that together, we know where we're going. It's unavoidable. And look, Reform have got the momentum now. But look, I've been in politics a long time. I know there's going to be hiccups. I know there's going to be things that aren't going to go well, and the Tories will have a better time, and then the Tories will have a worse time. And it's going to go back and forth. And you can hope that at the particular time the election is called,
things are going well.
Despite the fact that the newspapers will take the Tory side, because they always take the Tory side, things are going well.
Do you think Kemi Badenoch is still going to be Conservative leader? I mean, basically, she was supposed to be somebody, very popular with Conservatives. You'd think that the Tories would have gone up in the polls. I think it's too soon for people to forgive the Tories for their failures. But, she's gone, the party's gone down 2 points.
Well, look, Kemi's point is that she needs a little bit more time to prove herself. And
we're going to have some policies at some point. And we're apparently not going to get needed for 2 years. That's just not going to fly with voters.
Look, I think there is a challenge with her sort of replicating Keir Starmer's strategy, that Reform just poses a very, very different type of threat. I think actually what you're seeing is her slightly starting to correct that in recent weeks. I think that's why she's gone so hard on the grooming gangs. I think she has realised that she has to show a little bit of ankle probably sooner than she was first putting across. But Kemi responds, I think it's fair to say, she doesn't always change her mind